There was a time when Steven Seagal was a pretty respectable action star. That time is long gone. Strange and controversial are good words to describe the modern-day Seagal, and these are all the reasons why.
In 1992, Steven Seagal starred in Under Siege, an action flick that grossed over $150 million worldwide. 11 years later, he starred in The Foreigner, a movie with a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Basically, this guy has come a long way down since the 1990s. According to multiple actors, Steven Seagal is an incredibly difficult co-worker. John Leguizamo found out the hard way. While in rehearsals for Executive Decision, Leguizamo laughed at something Seagal had said, so Steven responded with an executive decision of his own.
And he came up and he taekwondo'd my ass against the brick wall. He went, he's 6'5" and caught me off guard, knocked all the air at me. I was like, why?
Then there's The Glimmer Man, where the script calls for Seagal's character to kill a serial murderer, played by legendary character actor Steven Tobolowsky.
Am I right or am I right or am I right? Right.
Seagal decided he didn't want to kill so many people in movies anymore, and even tried convincing Tobolowsky that his serial killer character should live. The scene was eventually filmed as written, and Tobolowsky's murderer met his maker.
My entire chest explodes, like my heart explodes, like blood flies out at the camera and I fall out of frame and smoke rises.
Of course, as filming progressed, Seagal improvised lines about how he sure was glad he didn't kill that guy in the church. The film's director called Tobolowsky in to record some extra dialogue to make it seem like his character's on-screen death was a little less permanent. What'd he settle on?
I ended up shouting up, "Finish me off, you son of a Come on, don't leave me like this! Kill me!"
Steven Seagal has done quite a bit of fight choreography. According to IMDb, most of the films he's choreographed are his own, but in the early 80s, Seagal worked on the James Bond film Never Say Never Again, having been brought on board to teach Sean Connery some Aikido. Meanwhile, Connery was already well-versed in karate, having been awarded an honorary third-degree black belt while preparing for 1967's You Only Live Twice. Connery explained what went down when the pair worked together in an interview on Jay Leno's Tonight Show in 1996.
And then I got a little cocky because I thought I knew what I was doing because, you know, the principle is it's defense, so it's a pyramid, and I got a bit flash and I did that, and he broke my wrist.
Wow.
And,
There's no denying that Steven Seagal is an accomplished martial artist. He's a legit seventh Dan in Aikido, a martial art that relies on joint locks and the redirection of momentum. He was even the first American to teach Aikido in Japan. But more than a few fighters think that Aikido is actually kind of worthless when it comes to self-defense. Fight analyst Jack Slack says Aikido only works if your opponent is running straight at you, something most smart fighters never actually do. UFC commentator and fighting fan Joe Rogan adds that Aikido would never work against a trained fighter, never, not in a million years. If you couldn't tell from his filmography, Steven Seagal is fascinated with law enforcement. Well, with the exception of Under Siege.
Are you like some special forces guy or something?
I'm just a cook.
A cook?
Anyway, Seagal actually served as a cop in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana for about 20 years. Then in 2009, Seagal took things to the next level by starring in a reality show called Steven Seagal Lawman. In the third season, Seagal teamed up with the controversial Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Maricopa County in Arizona. In 2011, Arpaio orchestrated a raid against Jesus Llovera, a local man suspected of cockfighting. But when the cops showed up, they had a lot more than just a warrant. There were up to 40 SWAT officers, a bomb squad, K-9 units, and even armored vehicles.
We hope to take the suspect and anybody else who is inside the house by surprise.
And what could be more surprising than the police tanks that tore down the gates to Llovera's property? Or the damage done to parts of his house during the raid? This peacock had no idea what to expect. Llovera eventually pled guilty to cockfighting, and the 115 roosters that he kept at his house were saved, right? Wrong. Apparently the police actually euthanized them all. So that's something. With a career as varied as Steven Seagal's, it's important to remember that he's not just about punching, kicking, and killing lots of chickens. This dude also plays the guitar in a blues band. And sometimes he does, well, whatever this is.
The savviest movie stars give the people what they want. And in the late 80s, the people wanted a sort of mystical stone-faced martial arts expert with a ponytail. In other words, Steven Seagal.
I have something in my pocket right now. It'll completely clear up that bruise on your forehead. What bruise?
He ruled the box office for years with huge hits like Hard to Kill, Above the Law, and Under Siege. But tastes changed and eventually he faded from movie star prominence. So whatever happened to Steven Seagal? Seagal's contract with Warner Brothers ended with the release of the environmentally themed thriller Fire Down Below in 1997.
Crack my wood, that's no good.
He still makes action movies though. It's just that most of them have gone straight to DVD or streaming. In fact, Seagal has churned out more than 30 movies in the last 2 decades, with awesome titles like Urban Justice, Out for a Kill, and Half Past Dead. Awesome. In the late 80s, Jefferson Parish, Louisiana Sheriff Harry Lee asked Seagal to train his force in martial arts, eventually enlisting Seagal as a reserve deputy. In 2009, Seagal's side gig became the basis for a reality show on A&E called Steven Seagal Lawman.
This is not good.
It was similar to Cops, except that Steven Seagal was there, which had to be really weird for the criminals.
Seagal, my wife love you. I don't like you, but my wife love you.
Sadly, Seagal reportedly resigned from the force after he found himself the subject of an internal affairs investigation that, according to the Phoenix New Times, sought to uncover the truth about allegations of sex trafficking and sexual assault. But in 2011, Seagal used the lemons life gave him to make lemonade with the action series True Justice, which he created and starred in as Elijah Kane, head of an elite undercover Seattle task force. It ran for 26 episodes on the network Reels before being cancelled. From 1999 to 2007, Seagal owned a 995-acre lavender farm in Northern California, where he grew the raw materials for Diamond Lotus Essentials, a line of therapeutic oils. And he currently owns an estate in California's Santa Ynez Valley, where he grows Cabernet grapes that he then sells to other wineries.
You've done well.
Plus, there's Steven Seagal's Lightning Bolt, a line of canned energy drinks that was proudly marketed as the first of its kind to contain Tibetan goji berries and Asian cordyceps. Seagal has been married 4 times. His third and most prominent marriage was with another nostalgic icon, model and actress Kelly LeBrock, most famous for being the dream woman created by team scientists in Weird Science. Seagal and LeBrock divorced in 1996 after he reportedly had an affair with their nanny, and she got pregnant. In 2009, he married his personal assistant, Erdentuya Batsuk. But a year later, another of Seagal's former personal assistants, Kaden Nguyen, sued Seagal for $1 million, alleging he sexually harassed and abused her. Those allegations were corroborated by 2 other female ex-employees who alleged similar treatment by the actor, but the suit was dropped later in the year. In 2007, Seagal's pal Jackie Chan is rumored to have suggested that Seagal play the villain in Rush Hour 3. After that fell through, in 2010, Sylvester Stallone offered Seagal a part in the action flick The Expendables, which was chock full of 80s action heroes. Seagal refused though, due to a feud with one of the film's producers, and missed out on what would have been one of the biggest hits of his career.
Steven Seagal was once among the biggest action stars in the world. Now, though, he's among the biggest caricatures in the world thanks to his many ill-advised antics. For instance, he was a historically awful Saturday Night Live host, often ranked as the worst host ever. He made horrible movie after horrible movie, and that's not even mentioning the truly gross behavior, such as his support of oppressive dictatorships and the numerous people who have accused him of sexual assault and rape. But even Seagal can't get away with this kind of behavior forever, which is how Steven Seagal got targeted by the mob. It sounds like something out of one of his movies, but according to the New York Times, Seagal and his producer Julius R. Nasso got involved in an acrimonious legal dispute over a reported $500,000 Seagal owed his business partner. Things escalated from there, and Nasso finally brought in the big guns, literally, as he asked the Gambino family to shake down Seagal old school style. Things reportedly came to a head when mafia types ordered Seagal to step into a car and drove him to a Brooklyn restaurant where an alleged Gambino captain called Anthony Ciccone had a little talk with him, ordering the movie star to resume his working relationship with Nasso. and to pay a cool $150,000 for every film he'd made with the producer. Seagal says that after Nasso and the mob paid him another visit in his LA home, he ended up paying $700,000. If you wonder why Seagal didn't simply glare at his tormentors and throw the entire concept of organized crime through a window like he does in his movies, well, these guys weren't acting. In fact, Seagal claims that after he left the restaurant meeting, one of Ciccone's men told him, if you would have said the wrong thing, they would have killed you. This all came to light when Seagal was called to witness by the authorities in a 2003 racketeering trial of several notable gangsters. Seagal was called in precisely because of his history with Ciccone, and his testimony revealed the gravity of the situation. He revealed that Ciccone told him, "Look at me when I talk to you. We're proud people. Work with Jules and we'll split the pie." Seagal also stated that he hadn't contacted the authorities in his struggle with the mob because he feared what might happen to his life or career. He said, "I'm a movie star. If you want to keep making movies, you don't want to start a war with these people." He also revealed in his testimony that he had carried a gun during his meetings with the mob, but while Seagal portrays himself as being cool and collected, the mobsters apparently didn't think so. Audio from a wiretapped restaurant in Brooklyn reveals that the mafia had a significantly different view on how things went. According to prosecutors, the suspects could be heard laughing about their meeting with Seagal and how, quote, petrified the actor had looked. Ouch. The time the mob went after Steven Seagal was actually just one short part of the actor's copious misadventures with Julius R. Nasso. According to the Los Angeles Times in 2002, Nasso slapped Seagal with a whopping $60 million lawsuit, alleging that the actor had walked back on an agreement to work together on 4 more movies. In 2003, the producer was arrested and pled guilty on charges of conspiring to extort the martial arts star and received a 1-year prison sentence. However, their legal battle raged on until 2008 when they ultimately settled out of court. Neither Seagal nor Nasso commented on the size of the settlement sum, though the Los Angeles Times reports that Seagal had to pay roughly $500,000 to his former producer. While this may seem peanuts compared to $60 million, Nasso seemed pleased, telling Staten Island Live, "I got a lot more than I expected. I am very pleased." Nasso has said that he also acquired something more precious than money. A letter from Seagal to the Office of the Pardon Attorney which read, "I am writing this letter to indicate that I have no objection to and would support the application, when it is timely, of Julius R. Nasso for a presidential pardon." Hey, if it's good enough for turkeys, it's good enough for Steven Seagal.
Whatever your opinion of Steven Seagal may otherwise be, his black belts are very real. Yes, that's belts in plural. Though Seagal is mainly known for his Aikido wizardry, he's also the proud owner of black belts in karate, kendo, and judo. Seagal has been heavily into martial arts since he was a small child, and he moved to Japan when he was 17 to study Zen and hone his martial arts skills. He ended up spending around 15 years in Asia doing all sorts of Steven Seagal things, such as studying Eastern philosophy and working as a martial arts choreographer. As chuckle-worthy and/or worrisome as Steven Seagal's antics might be these days, if you ask his old Aikido cohort Haruo Matsuoka, Seagal is, or at least used to be, the real deal. According to Black Belt Mag, Matsuoka was one of Sensei Seagal's favorite students in the 1970s, and Seagal even recruited him as his uke, the guy all those Aikido moves are demonstrated on when he set out to conquer Hollywood. Matsuoka and the article both make Seagal's brand of Aikido seem like a fairly ruthless, brutal, and street-ready affair that drew heavy influence from Japanese swordsmanship. Apparently, Seagal held great influence within Aikido circles and was on great terms with at least some of the higher-ups. Matsuoka even points out that Aikido had an extremely hard time in the West until Seagal's 1988 breakthrough movie Above the Law caused the art's popularity to explode virtually overnight. On the other hand, Matsuoka points out that Seagal's newfangled famous person ways ultimately estranged the two and caused them to fall out in 1997. Fittingly, that's around the era that Seagal started moving from box office successes like Under Siege to direct-to-video fare like The Patriot. Steven Seagal may be an Aikido master, but his reported judo prowess might be a bit less impressive. At least if you believe the story of his altercation with a man nicknamed Judo. Jean Judo LaBelle, a bona fide martial arts legend, apparently taught Seagal some humility while serving as the fight choreographer for the Seagal vehicle Out for Justice. When Seagal boasted that he simply couldn't be choked out, LaBelle happily took up the challenge. As a result of this very brief altercation, Seagal passed out so hard that he, evacuated his bowels in front of about 30 stuntmen and crew members, if you believe LaBelle.
Oh, how the mighty have fallen.
To be entirely fair, LaBelle is perfectly cordial about the incident and says he respects Seagal as a martial artist, though he points out that the Aikido master would do well if he abstained from speaking in potential foot-and-mouth situations. It should also be noted that LaBelle has been known to tell a tale or two in his time, and Seagal himself vehemently denies this ever happened. Still, one would probably be forgiven for not betting on Seagal in a judo match. Karate might not be the first martial art you associate with Steven Seagal, but it turns out he started his studies as a karate kid. That's not clever wordplay either. He actually studied under Fumio Demura, a man who also trained Pat Morita, who played Mr. Miyagi in the Karate Kid movies and brought a lot of Demura to the role. According to the Daily Beast, Demura has played a part in inspiring legends such as Dolph Lundgren and Chuck Norris. He even worked with Bruce Lee, who he briefly tutored on the use of nunchaku. Seagal is happy to sing his old master's praises.
Demura-sensei is the real thing.
His Aikido skills may have gotten him to the top of late 80s action cinema, but they can't save Steven Seagal from DVD bombs, sexual assault lawsuits, and Vladimir Putin. The 80s saw the rise of the muscle-bound martial arts ass-kicker, who roundhoused entire warehouses full of B-movie bad guys that couldn't aim. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone are the most notable names, but guys like Jean-Claude Van Damme and Chuck Norris weren't far behind. In 1988, a new name joined the ranks of these shredded badasses, Steven Seagal, star and co-writer of the crime thriller Above the Law. The story follows Nico Toscani, played by Seagal, a former CIA operative who uses martial arts to help Chicago cops take down a heavily armed drug ring. It wasn't great. Rotten Tomatoes gives it a lukewarm 50% based on 20 reviews, but it still ranks among Seagal's best and most well-known films. More importantly, it was an effective launchpad for his career, establishing him as a chisel-jawed, no-nonsense name to watch. Roger Ebert even gave the movie 3 stars, and heaped praise on the leading man himself, writing, "He does have a strong and particular screen presence. It is obvious he is doing a lot of his own stunts, and some of the fight sequences are impressive and apparently unfaked. He isn't just a hunk either. He can play tender and he can play smart, 2 notes often missing on the Bronson and Stallone accordions." By the time Seagal had karate chopped his way to the top of the action B-movie pile in the early 90s, the craze was already winding down. But he still had one bullet in the chamber, 1992's star-studded Under Siege. Seagal stars as Casey Ryback, a Navy SEAL who removes the chef's hat to thwart Tommy Lee Jones's William Stranix, a bitter terrorist who commandeers the USS Missouri with help from inside man Commander Peter Krill, played by Gary Busey. The initial takeover goes well, until the bad guys realize Ryback is stealing through the ship's corridors, taking out their accomplices one by one, in the lead-up to an epic final showdown. As Roger Ebert points out in his 3-star review, the formula is Die Hard goes to sea. The renowned film critic praised the cast, saying the villains were superb, vile, and deliriously insane. As for Seagal, he makes a convincing cook. He can hit a target with a carving knife at 20 paces. In the end, Under Siege is Seagal's highest-ranking movie, nabbing a well-earned 79% on Rotten Tomatoes. The success of any given Saturday Night Live episode often comes down to the comedic chops of its celebrity guest hosts. Sometimes you'll get a Tom Hanks or Steve Martin who leads the cast in a hilarious round of comedy. Other times, like in April 1991, you end up with a Steven Seagal, who is widely considered to be the single worst host in the show's history. Yes, indeed, after decades of nearly weekly episodes and no shortage of lousy hosts, Steven Seagal bottoms the list. According to Tom Shale's book, Live from New York, The Complete Uncensored History of Saturday Night Live as told by its stars, writers, and guests, Seagal was exceedingly difficult to work with, shot down almost every idea the writers had prepared, and refused to appear in any skit that didn't frame him as a macho tough guy. Furthermore, he had his own sketch ideas. Shales relates one particular observation from cast member Julia Sweeney at the time. Some of his sketch ideas were so heinous, so hilariously awful, it was like we were on candid camera. She wasn't alone. SNL chief Lorne Michaels agrees with the dismal sentiment.
Well, they probably think I'm the biggest jerk who's ever been on the show.
No, that would be Steven Seagal.
Well,
After making a name for himself in Above the Law and Under Siege, Seagal's career took a turn away from anything truly notable. Sure, there was 2010's Machete, where he played Rogelio Torres, criminal and former partner of Danny Trejo's titular character. It was just self-aware enough to sell the schlock, and came away with a 71% on Rotten Tomatoes. But in the years leading up to Machete, Seagal avoided the big screen and instead prowled the dank basements of direct-to-video purgatory. 16 of the 24 films he starred in between 2001 and 2009 went straight to on-demand or DVD, without even a limited theatrical release in major markets. Furthermore, almost all of his direct-to-video films suffered from the exact slate of issues one might imagine. Low budgets, lazy writing, plots centered around cliched locations such as abandoned warehouses, and with a handful of recyclable prop guns. The biggest issue with getting the word out about these so bad they're really bad bombs is that almost nobody has bothered to watch, and therefore review, the vast majority of them. So there's no Rotten Tomatoes score or reputable review to cite. But you can probably get the gist by glancing at a cover and seeing a past-his-prime Seagal scowling in front of a photoshopped explosion. 2003's Out for a Kill is so lazy, Seagal actually performs an entire fight scene sitting down. There's also 2016's Sniper Special Ops, which sounds like a fun shoot-'em-up video game, but fails to deliver any fun at all, according to John Noonan at Film Inc. 2005's Black Dawn doesn't even star Seagal in any fight scenes, owing to him leaving the production halfway through filming. Over the course of his career, Steven Seagal has been accused of sexual misconduct by multiple women. Back in 2002, Die Another Day Bond girl Rachel Grant claimed the star pulled her top down and forced her onto his bed in a hotel room. As reported by Sky News, Grant further alleged that after she rejected Seagal, she didn't get the part she'd been auditioning for in Out for a Kill. In an interview with Movie Line, Jenny McCarthy described an incident in which Seagal allegedly ordered her, who was auditioning for a role in Under Siege 2, to undress, before grabbing her and ordering her to stay silent after she protested. And in 2010, Seagal was sued by his former personal assistant, Caden Nguyen, for repeatedly attempting to grope her and even forcibly drugging her. In the same lawsuit, Nguyen alleged that Seagal was engaged in sex trafficking because he was attended to around the clock by young Russian women who were to fulfill his every need. TMZ reported that Seagal had a habit of luring women to his home under the guise of discussing movie roles, only to make sexual advances on them. Ray Charles's granddaughter, Blair Robinson, claimed she fled one supposed film opportunity after Seagal said they should mutually massage each other. Russia faced near universal global condemnation after launching the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine. But while the hammer of international sanctions and isolation hit hard, they weren't left completely alone. Steven Seagal maintained his friendly public stance towards Russia's Vladimir Putin, one which was controversial even before the war. As reported by Newsweek, the cinematic action hero has concrete ties to the Kremlin, and while viral rumors that Seagal was actually on the ground in eastern Ukraine fighting with the Russians were untrue, he has fostered a relationship with Russia for decades. Seagal hasn't backed off since the war began either. If anything, his warmth towards Putin's regime has only grown. In April 2022, a clip surfaced on Twitter in which Seagal gave a motivational speech to high-ranking Russian officials. Another Newsweek article reported that Seagal condemned the Ukrainian use of HIMARS, or High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, and even seemed to back up Russian talking points about the need to denazify Ukraine via invasion. In October of 2022, Seagal wished Putin a very happy birthday on Instagram, saying, "Today is President Putin's birthday. I just think that we are now living in very, very trying times."
He is one of the greatest world leaders and one of the greatest presidents in the world.
There's an infamously embarrassing story about what Steven Seagal supposedly did to himself after crossing a legendary stunt coordinator. And that's far from the only time he's offended pretty much everyone he ever met. Charlize Theron is quite the thespian and action star. She won an Oscar for 2003's Monster, and she's kicked butt in the likes of Atomic Blonde, The Old Guard, and Mad Max Fury Road. But one thing she hasn't quite cracked is how to get along with Steven Seagal. During a 2020 interview with Howard Stern, Theron criticized Seagal's fighting skills, or lack thereof, by referencing viral videos of him clumsily pushing around bumbling opponents. As she put it, he's just incredibly overweight and pushing people. He's overweight and can barely fight. It's ridiculous. Theron also referenced the numerous allegations of sexual assault and improper behavior against Seagal that have been made by the likes of Portia de Rossi, Jenny McCarthy, and others. As she explained, "I have no problem talking about him because he's not very nice to women, so you." Steven Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme were two of the biggest action stars of the 1990s. They sported two very different combat styles, so a fight between them would have made for an interesting match. and it almost came to pass during a party thrown at the residence of none other than Sylvester Stallone. As Stallone recalled to Ain't It Cool News in 2006, Van Damme was tired of Seagal saying he could kick his ass and went right up to him and offered him the chance to step outside. When Seagal declined and left, Van Damme followed him to a nightclub and made his offer again, but then Seagal vanished. Van Damme verified this story in 2023 in an interview with The Telegraph, adding that he only tracked Seagal down at the nightclub because he left him waiting outside for 2 hours before chickening out. He also noted, "People told me he doesn't speak so nice about me. I don't know why." It seems like it would take a lot to get on the bad side of someone as affable as Bob Odenkirk, but Steven Seagal somehow managed that feat during the notorious time that he hosted Saturday Night Live in April 1991. Odenkirk was a writer on SNL at the time, and decades later, he was still confounded by the humorlessness and cluelessness displayed by Seagal that night. As he recalled during an appearance on The Howard Stern Show in 2022, his attitude the whole week was, he kept saying, "I've never seen your show. I don't know what you do here."
Like, really? You've never seen Saturday Night Live? Where do you live?
Odenkirk described one sketch in particular, written by Seagal, in which he invaded an Exxon board meeting to beat up everyone present before angrily proclaiming,
"This is what happens when you pollute the planet."
According to Odenkirk, the audience was mystified. When Stern asked how SNL producer Lorne Michaels could have allowed this fiasco to happen, Odenkirk explained that by the time that everything was going off the rails during rehearsals, it was too late to do anything. You can add the late, great martial arts legend Bob Wall to the list of people who definitely weren't fans of Steven Seagal. In the mid-1980s, before Seagal became famous, he was trash-talking what he perceived to be the sorry state of martial arts in America. Wall took this personally, and a serious feud began to take shape that was fueled in part by dueling interviews in Black Belt magazine. Wall publicly panned Seagal's debut feature film, 1988's Above the Law, to which Seagal responded, "If Mr. Wall has anything bad to say about me, let him come say it to my face." By 1991, Wall had put together a squad of famous martial artists known as the Dirty Dozen, whom he claimed were all ready and willing to fight Seagal in the ring. And he made it clear what he thought of him by declaring, "I know 5 dozen guys who could whip Seagal's hide. There's not just one guy who can embarrass Seagal. There's dozens. I only picked 12 of them." Chuck Norris is another famous martial artist who didn't exactly harbor fuzzy feelings towards Steven Seagal. As Bob Wall's former instructor, Norris was doubtless aware of the beef between him and Seagal. During a 1993 appearance on The Dick Cavett Show, the host asked Norris how good of a martial artist Seagal was. Norris hemmed and hawed at first by explaining, "Most of Seagal's movies, his action is done close up. Everything is real quick cuts, so you don't get a chance to really see exactly what he's doing." When Cavett then relayed a story about a martial artist who responded threateningly when he tried to introduce himself at a bookstore, Norris asked if it was Seagal. Cavett responded that it wasn't, but he opined that Seagal looked the part. Then he asked Norris, "That menacing, really rotten kind of guy image that he projects, it's largely acting, is it or not?" Norris shook his head before replying, "It carries over into his whole life." When Cavett then asked Norris, in an odd turn of phrase, if Seagal had ever crunched his instep, he replied, "No, he wouldn't dare." Comedian Tom Segura's distaste for Steven Seagal was plenty clear in a lengthy bit from his 2014 Netflix special, Completely Normal, in which he called out Seagal as one of the phoniest and most unlikable people on the planet. Segura's evidence largely consisted of episodes of the A&E reality series Steven Seagal, Lawman, as he took Seagal to task for being a self-proclaimed expert on topics which he obviously had little knowledge of.
Okay, I'll pass, because that's ridiculous. I don't want to be a part of that.
Segura revisited the topic of Seagal during a conversation with Talib Kweli on the latter's podcast in 2021, as he revealed, "All the stories I've heard about Seagal are pretty terrible, consistently terrible. You go on a movie set and you're like, tell me about Seagal, and people are like, look, I don't talk shit about people, but I will talk shit about him."
They're like consistently saying what a terrible person he is.
In addition to being an MMA champion, Randy Couture has established a respectable career as an actor and a stuntman. Now, Steven Seagal has long had a reputation for not exactly being gentle with the stunt performers in his movies. That might explain why in 2012, Couture jokingly named Seagal when Jay Glazer asked him if he would come out of retirement to fight anyone. Seagal didn't take this as a joke, though. Instead, he declared, If Randy really wants to fight me, he can fight me anytime he wants. It'll be for free, and it'll be someplace where there are no witnesses. Couture was basically able to laugh off Seagal's aggressive response. During a 2021 interview with MMA Junkie Radio, he explained, "Everybody knows the rumors and all that stuff regarding stuntmen getting injured. I got started in stunts. I was lucky enough to get some real acting gigs. For all the stuntmen out there, I will stick to my guns and say Seagal would be that guy." Brian Cox may be a tremendously talented actor, but even he has starred in a few absolute stinkers, like the 1996 buddy cop action comedy The Glimmer Man, which also starred Steven Seagal. In Cox's 22 memoir, Putting the Rabbit in the Hat, he offered his unvarnished opinions of several of his past co-stars. And he saved his most hilariously poetic description for a certain notorious martial artist. As Cox put it, Steven Seagal is as ludicrous in real life as he appears on screen. He radiates a studied serenity, as though he's on a higher plane to the rest of us. While he's certainly on a different plane, no doubt about that, it's probably not a higher one. Juliana Margulies has a pretty personal reason for her negative opinion of Steven Seagal. When she was an up-and-coming actress, she was up for a part in Seagal's 1991 movie Out for Justice, so she met with him in his hotel room to discuss the part. What allegedly happened next was bizarre and a little threatening. During a 2021 interview on Q with Tom Power, Margulies explained how when she sat on the couch, she felt something hard under the cushion.
And he said, that's sorry, I must have left my gun there. And he took out from under the cushion this big black pistol.
Seagal then allegedly put the gun on his nightstand and asked to read Margulies' palm. She then blurted out that she had to leave and virtually sprinted out the door. While recounting the same story to podcaster Jenny Hutt in 2017, Margulies revealed that she later turned down a similar hotel room meeting with none other than disgraced mogul Harvey Weinstein. There's a legendary story in the martial arts community about an incident that allegedly took place on the set of Out for Justice, on which the late judo master Gene LaBelle was a stunt coordinator. The story goes that Steven Seagal told LaBelle that as an Aikido master, he could get out of any hold that LaBelle could throw at him. LaBelle then promptly put Seagal in a chokehold that he couldn't escape, causing him to pass out and soil himself. One of LaBelle's former students was MMA icon Ronda Rousey, who made it clear that she was familiar with the story when she offered her opinion of Seagal during an interview in 2012. As she put it, obviously the guy's a liar. Gene LaBelle would destroy Steven Seagal again. I'd still put my money on him to this day. Rousey also couldn't resist adding, "I would beat the crap out of Steven Seagal. I would have to make him crap his pants a second time." Late rap legend DMX dabbled a bit in acting, including a pair of Steven Seagal movies, 2001's Exit Wounds and 2019's Beyond the Law. The latter effort was probably nothing more than a paycheck for both of them. After all, Seagal isn't generally known to abide people who trash talk him. And after DMX's experience on Exit Wounds, he talked enough to overflow a landfill. For his part, though, Seagal had nothing but good things to say publicly about DMX after their first movie wrapped. Following Exit Wounds' premiere, he told IGN, "I kind of investigated him a little before we began, and there were no surprises. DMX was a gentleman with me. He's reflective, thoughtful, gentle. He respects me, and I respect him." DMX, however, remembered things a little differently. In an interview with Raptor, he declared in no uncertain terms, "Steven Seagal is he's a f***ing shithead with spray-on hair. He talked like he was an old slave master." DMX went on to describe how he and his wife joked about Seagal's alleged appalling behavior behind his back, and then he called him an ass for good measure. Eventually, though, it seems that his anger apparently cooled, at least if their latter collaboration in Beyond the Law is any indication.
In 2018, the Kremlin appointed Steven Seagal as a goodwill ambassador to improve cultural ties between Russia and the US. That's weird enough on its own, but how did we get here? Odd as the two may seem together, it's not the first time a nation's figurehead has teamed up with a pop culture icon. One other example is former NBA player Dennis Rodman and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, who have appeared in the past to have an unexpected friendship. Another example is the relationship between Steven Seagal and Russian President Vladimir Putin. While his box office stock has fallen off significantly in recent years, Steven Seagal made a fair pile of money for the movie industry back in the 90s and still makes movies to this day.
You're still a loser. I remember you.
He's even done reality TV for A&E on Steven Seagal Lawman, which relayed his adventures as a reserve deputy in Louisiana. His action hero status is based at least in part on his expertise in the martial art of Aikido. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is a former KGB agent who has professed an affinity for judo. But even having a shared interest in martial arts, the question remains, just how did Vladimir Putin and Steven Seagal end up as seemingly close friends? NPR gives credit to Bob Van Runkel and his company Doors to Hollywood. Van Runkel's company has a very special business niche of bringing Hollywood celebrities to Russia. There are powerful figures in Russia who try to enhance their image as major players by developing relationships with American celebrities. According to his website, Van Runkel was responsible for bringing Richard Gere to Russia in 2018 so the actor could speak at a global forum. Van Runkel also brought Arnold Schwarzenegger for another global forum held in St. Petersburg. The list of guests he has taken to Russia is extensive and wildly diverse. It includes celebrities ranging from Paul Anka to Jim Carrey and Katy Perry to John Malkovich. Van Runkel lived in Moscow for 15 years, says the Washington Post, but he currently resides in the United States while he still works to offer his own brand of United States-Russian diplomacy. As far as his motives are concerned, Van Runkel lays it out clearly, telling the Washington Post, "I'm not a political guy, I'm a deal guy." In Russia, Seagal reportedly met Putin at an after-party and the two became fast friends. Putin even gave Steven a Russian passport in 2016. In speaking about his admiration for Putin, Seagal has said, "Vladimir Putin is one of the greatest world leaders, if not the greatest world leader alive today." According to NPR in 2017, Seagal stood up for Putin amid claims that the Russian government had meddled in the 2016 United States presidential election, telling British TV, "For anyone to think that Vladimir Putin had anything to do with fixing the election, or even that the Russians have that kind of technology, is stupid."
I think that this whole thing with Russian collusion and the President of the United States being involved in Russian collusion, all this, I think it's all a fantasy.
In 2018, Russia named Seagal an unpaid official representative so that he could deepen cultural ties between the two nations, while assisting in improving humanitarian relations between Russia and the United States. Van Runkel has said, "For Steven Seagal, Russia is a place to rebrand himself." Steve Hall, the CIA's former head of Russian operations, said these relationships not only benefit a celebrity's branding, but also Russia's. Hall told NPR, "It looks very good for Russia because it shows that they are not alone in the world. They haven't been isolated. They indeed have these cultural connections, and they use it to basically increase their validity to the West, and it's a very clever move that they've done for a long time." However, business has died down for Van Runkel in recent years due to economic sanctions, oil prices, and the value of the Russian ruble. Van Runkel admitted to NPR, "Russians that would give me $1 million to bring Mariah Carey, Kiss, and a lot of others like that, they didn't have the money. It would cost them twice as much in rubles."
In a real-life reversal of his typical vigilante roles, Seagal himself was once embroiled in a controversy brought forward by one of the United States' chief legal authorities, the FBI. One could say the FBI were out for justice. They thought that Seagal considered himself above the law. But even though Seagal was under siege and may have had a journalist's car marked for death, ultimately, the FBI made an executive decision not to attribute the car's bullet hole exit wounds to him. Okay, enough joking around. Officially, Seagal was never charged, but he was also never cleared, and has been all but blacklisted in Hollywood ever since. But even though Seagal never got the apology he believes he deserved, he will, to himself, always remain the ultimate badass. Seagal's extended saga with the law began with Anthony Pellicano, who was once Hollywood's chief detective to the stars. But really, Pellicano was always more of a strong arm than an investigator, who, as the New York Times says, would drive around Los Angeles with a baseball bat in his trunk, in case he needed to conduct some impromptu intimidation. In 2019, Pellicano was released from prison after a 15-year sentence for operating a vast surveillance network that conducted illegal wiretaps on actors such as Sylvester Stallone. Pellicano worked with a lot of people, including Chris Rock, Courtney Love, and yes, Steven Seagal. That is, until the early 90s, when Seagal said they stopped being on speaking terms. A decade or so later, in 2002, Anita Bush, reporter for Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, and later The New York Times, was working on a story covering, quote, unflattering information about Seagal and a former business associate. At the time, per The New York Times, Bush was also collaborating with the Los Angeles Times in a piece about, quote, organized crime links to the entertainment industry. On June 20th, Bush found a note taped to her car in the morning telling her to stop the investigation, beside a dead fish and rose in a tin tray on the windshield. However, more disturbingly, Bush also found what appeared to be a bullet hole in the windshield, next to the troubling note. When Bush first reported the incident, she received little but mockery, especially from New Times in Los Angeles, a rival Los Angeles newspaper that has since gone out of business. In fact, she was even accused of having made up the entire incident. As Bush herself put it to the New York Times, "I was telling the truth and no one was believing me. People started questioning whether I had somehow lost my mind." Eventually, the FBI approached Seagal as a suspect in the case, and the actor immediately said it was absurd that he would hire Pelicano to terrorize Bush.
That's not something that credible people talk about too often.
In a public statement, Seagal blamed this accusation for crippling his career, saying, "These kinds of inflammatory allegations scare studio heads and independent producers and kill careers." Admittedly, Seagal passed a polygraph test that indicated he was telling the truth, though some saw this as more of a publicity stunt than a demonstration of innocence. The investigation moved to Pelicano himself. 6 years later, in 2008, Bush finally took the stand in a trial whereby Pelicano and 6 associates were brought up on no less than 110 charges of spying and illegal wiretapping. As a result, Pelicano served time in prison all the way until 2019, when he was released. Seagal, for his part, got off completely free. It seems he really might be hard to kill, after all. Sorry, we couldn't resist.
People who didn't closely follow the fortunes of actor Steven Seagal may have been surprised on May 5, 2017, when The Guardian reported that Ukraine had forbidden his entrance for 5 years, citing him as a threat to national security. In a letter announcing the Seagal embargo, the Ukrainian Security Service wrote that the actor had committed socially dangerous actions that contradict the interest of maintaining Ukrainian security. One of those actions was his receiving Russian citizenship in 2016. Seagal was given his Russian passport by none other than strongman President Vladimir Putin himself, who said he hoped that their, quote, personal relationship will remain and continue. That special relationship came about in part because of Seagal's support to Putin's annexation of Crimea. In an interview Seagal gave to Russia Today, the Kremlin's media outlet, he lambasted U.S. opposition to the move while endorsing Putin's actions. His desire to protect the Russian-speaking people of Crimea, his assets, and the Russian Black Sea military base in Sevastopol is very reasonable. Seagal's vocal support earned him both the position of Russian envoy to the U.S., as well as an eventual path to Russian citizenship and more. About Putin's evaluation of Seagal, Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesperson, said, "I wouldn't necessarily say Putin is a huge fan, but he's definitely seen some of Seagal's movies." Crimea, of course, was part of Ukraine until Russia invaded and annexed it, so their unhappiness with Seagal is understandable. But they aren't alone. In 2014, AFP reported that Estonia had canceled Seagal's appearance at a blues festival after popular outcry. Estonian Foreign Minister Urmas Paet said, "Steven Seagal has tried to actively participate in politics during the past few months and has done it in a way which is unacceptable to the majority of the world that respects democracy and the rule of law." In other words,
now get your ugly white ass out of here. Don't come back.
Paet also called Seagal's support of the Russian annexation of Crimea, quote, mindless praise of a move that many, from the Brookings Institute to the EU to the US Embassy in Ukraine, consider to be illegal. That mindless praise included Seagal calling Putin, quote, one of the greatest world leaders. Estonia can empathize with Crimea, as the Baltic Republic was itself subjected to Russian occupation during the Cold War. It broke away from the USSR in 1991 and later joined NATO in 2004 in defense against Russian influence. And Seagal's support for Russia's exploits extends further than television appearances. Just a few weeks after Estonia canceled his gig, The Guardian noted that Seagal played at a pro-separatist concert in Sevastopol, an annexed port city in Crimea. In a move to double down on his support of Putin's actions in Crimea, the action star appeared on stage wrapped in the flag of the Ukrainian pro-Russia separatists. He was also seen sporting a Putin t-shirt that the concert's organizer gave him. Oh, and there was also a section where bikers danced in the shape of a giant human swastika as a Hitler speech played in the background, so there's that too. But while Seagal may talk the talk in public, behind closed doors, he doesn't seem to want to be a responsible Russian citizen. In December 2020, the Moscow Times reported that the actor's Russian bank account had been frozen for his failure to pay taxes in the country. A spokesperson for Seagal told the Russian-language news outlet Moskva, quote, most likely this is some kind of mistake. The Russian Federal Tax Service, however, said they were justified in the decision to suspend his financial activity in Russia. And the fact that Seagal would want to be a Russian citizen without paying his fair share of taxes really comes as no surprise. His support for Putin reveals a lack of ethics and respect for human rights. An appearance on the same stage as a bunch of swastika-dancing bikers doesn't help redeem him, not to mention all the other accusations against him. There's only one way to describe Seagal and his tattered reputation these days: under siege.